I first had the good fortune of having a big problem in Pro Tools. Big problem for me. It wasn't a big problem actually, but it was a big problem for me because it exceeded my skill set to be able to resolve it. So anyway, I have friends who also use Pro Tools, and they've got a rather large and rather busy studio vaguely in this area. And so I phoned up the lady that runs the studio, and I said, look, I'm having a problem. Can you point me in the right direction? She said, here's the number, the guy's name's Craig, phone him up. So this is about 4 years ago, something like that, I can't remember. And so I phoned up this guy who seemed very obliging on the phone, and he turned up and he said, oh yeah, no worries, and just did it, and it fixed. I thought, oh, okay. At that stage I thought I was certainly not an expert, but competent at, you know, like operating Pro Tools, and so I was also not only impressed with how quickly he got it done, but also he didn't make me feel like an idiot for doing it. He was very gracious.
It was a few years ago, got a random phone call from this random person saying that they needed some help with a Pro Tools job through a mutual friend of ours, and so I came over and helped him out with a very little job. And then about another year or year and a half went by, and he gave me a ring again out of the blue and said, I've got a project I want to do some work on and I need some help. Are you interested? Little did I know that it would be such a very, very, very big project. And I think about 2 years later, or slightly more than that, here we are today.
I wanted to, look, I've written a lot of Chassidic music over the years, because I've played live in Chassidic functions, at weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs and stuff, and so anyway, each client would say, oh, do you mind if you can play this song? So I'd have to be hard at work programming it and writing an arrangement for it and everything. And I've been operating at the high end of MIDI programming since probably 1987, something like that. So it's been a while. I'm only 26, so I was doing it before I was born. So anyway, in all of the work that I've ever done over the years, my opinion is that the most challenging and therefore the level of excellence I needed to achieve with this particular repertoire exceeded anything that went before it. I thought that I was fairly good in Pro Tools. I was able to get the job done, but as Craig started to unveil his understanding and his skills inside Pro Tools, and again, let me stress, he always did that in such a way as never to intimidate. He was always working with me together. Because my skill set inside Pro Tools is vastly overtaken by Craig's extra skills. Craig's been to audio engineering school, and also, not only that, but also his particular flavor as a person is that he's able to problem solve in a technical way. Me, I'm just a dreamer, you know, I just sort of, oh, that's a nice sound.
Very, very, very different. One, the style of music. So I've never worked with Jewish music before, so that was a big shock to the system. And two, the way that we're operating is essentially all inside the box. So working a lot with MIDI programs, which I'd had experience with before, but not to the extent that I have since I've started working with Tim. So rather than your traditional miking up an instrument and voice and mixing the whole lot, This is working with MIDI programs and getting them to sound like real instruments as much as possible, with the only thing that we've been miking up is a little bit of acoustic guitar and vocals. Everything else is inside Pro Tools.
When Craig is in the captain's chair, it's like as if he's driving a spaceship or playing an instrument. He's not just applying EQ or applying a compressor, whatever. It's like as if he's playing an instrument here, and he's very skilled on that instrument, and he knows just where to go to get to whatever. Nothing gets around him, and we've had a lot of really curly ones, and he's just kept going until the challenge is met, and we've got victory on the other side once again.
It's a home, so straight away you feel comfortable and warm and invited in. The setup that we've got here is absolutely phenomenal. Yes, you feel like you're in a bit of a spaceship control centre with all the TV screens and lights and flashing everything. He's spared absolutely no expense on making sure that we've got the right equipment to get the job done. To do it properly, you've got to spend the money, and that's absolutely what he's done. Extreme? Look, Tim said hours and hours and hours and hours of work has gone into each individual arrangement. I don't think that I could commit myself to the extent that Tim did during the arrangement phase. For him sitting down, listening to a song and then working out each individual instrument, what notes it's playing, then programming it in and making sure that it all sounds right and mixes together. Wow, massive, massive job. The challenge for me has then been translating what Tim programmed for his old MIDI sound canvases that he was used to, and they sounded great with the programs that Tim did, but translating them to the new instruments, there was a bit of a mismatch of communication in what Tim programmed and how these new programs read that information. So to make everything sound realistic and work with the programs, we actually then had to go back in and not rewrite his programming arrangements, but just manipulate them, certain components of them, to make it work properly with the new software. So I got a little bit of a taste, but not to the same extent as what Tim did.
The drums were a bit of a challenge because all of my drum patterns that all of the drum parts that I'd written, they were all written for a drum kit with 6 toms in it. Why? Because I had 6 toms available, so I used them. So we had software that ran to 4 toms. I thought, oh, what are we going to do? You know, I don't want to go in and rewrite everything. And I was happy with what I'd written, so why rewrite it? So with Craig's help, we went in and we got a couple of different softwares, and Craig and I sat down and I read out all of the note numbers that each of the drum instruments were: the kick, the bass, the hi-hat, the closed hi-hat, the cymbal, whatever it might be. So I remember I had the book saying 39 open hi-hat, and you go, right, 39. So we were sitting together. I was telling him the notes, and he was doing what he needed to do on the inside Pro Tools. I suppose that's the long way round of saying that's how I met Craig. I answered more than you asked for, sorry. There's 30 pieces for the 3 albums, 10 pieces on each album. Most of it's modern Chassidic music, but we've also got 1 or 2 Jewish standards, like Yiddish Mama occurs as the last song on the first album. That's not particularly Chassidic, although I have played it at Chassidic functions, you know. I still play that song at little concerts I give for aged care facilities here in Melbourne.
Welke tijden vermegens bencht Gott aller men. Men geeft es nicht für keine Geld, das gibt man nur siehst. Und doch als men verliert, das wiffelt wären, men vergibt.
The rationale for doing this 3-album collection is that in another 120 happy, healthy years, I'm not going to be here anymore, and unless I do something with this repertoire, it's just going to end up as a series of ones and zeros on a hard drive decaying in landfill somewhere. So I thought, well, I can't let that happen. So this whole project is basically because I've written something that I believe is something quite special, and I want to hear it how I had it in my mind to write it. So what I wanted to do was to not represent this any longer through a keyboard. I wanted to represent it through actual, real, sampled instruments. So that's what I did. I spent quite a lot of time on my own, and more so Craig and I working together to research if we I bought a native instruments package, and that seemed to work quite well to begin with, and then the gaps started to appear as we went further down the road. So as the gaps appeared, we went searching. Probably the most challenging instrument to get was the clarinet, because it's got so many different sonic nuances. It's not just a noise, like changing from one note to another. You've got squeaks and growls and this, and depending on how the guy phrased it.
Researching the instruments that we're using, so all the software virtual instruments. We are using arguably the world's best software when it comes to that, to get the best emulation of real world instruments possible. Tim has absolutely got all the right equipment to get the job done properly.
It's been a very challenging experience. Look, when I wrote each of these pieces, stretching over a 20-year period, or now it's a 25-year period, the default position I would explain to people is 1 minute on stage, 10 hours writing it. So it's disgustingly labor intensive. Like, only someone obsessed would MIDI program orchestral arrangements to this level, you know, because normal, balanced, sane humans wouldn't put themselves through this. So that's by way of saying that the actual process of programming was a very intense task. Some 4-minute songs took longer than 40 hours. There's one song on the first album here called Shaloi Melechim, and that took just under 100 hours, just for 4 minutes on stage, yeah. Each of these 3 albums has got 10 pieces on it. I say pieces, not songs, because some of the pieces are horrors. A horror is a medley collection of different songs all put together. One of the medleys in particular goes for about 15 minutes, and I think that was about slightly shy of 300 hours to write for that one. So that gives you an idea of the writing. Okay, so since having written and then starting the process with Craig, I naively thought, well, Craig's got it all done for him, I've already done the hard work, and blah, 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 and all we need to do is just sort of equivalate across to sampled instruments. What could be easier? Boy, did I have lessons to learn. And thank God that I found Craig, a jewel in this area. He's never come across a MIDI project to this intensity and writing to this level of sophistication before. And he's also never come across, to my knowledge anyway, I don't think he's come across this particular style of music before. So those were two shocks to the system, I suppose, as I introduced him to the repertoire. but he just took it under his belt, and he just owned the project. And so basically the way I see it is that prior to meeting Craig, it was my project. I no longer think of it that way. I think it's Craig and me. The two of us have done this as a team.
Wir wollen nicht weiter sehen, wir wollen nicht weiter sehen. Die Ewigkeit vergeht gesund und leben, wir wollen vor uns und den Rennen, wir wollen nicht weiter sehen.